we somehow have made it through 8 straight hours of YOUniverse. So thank you for everybody that's been up with us since 10 o'clock this morning. It's now 5 o'clock here in Boston, although it's 5 o'clock other places, I'm sure. And what perfect way to end this day than to have my friend Jon Miller, CEO of Engagio, come on and join us. He is a cocktail enthusiast with a habit for founding and running startups, apparently. But he's going to teach us how to make some tasty cocktails and mocktails after a long day of working from home. So Jon, thank you for spending the time. But why don't you tell the audience a bit more about yourself, including what you like to do in your 5 to 9, as well as your 9 to 5 responsibilities.
All right. Well, hello, everyone. Really glad to be here. So yeah, I guess starting the 9 to 5, I am the CEO and co-founder of Engagio, which is an account-based engagement platform. Previously, I was a co-founder of a company called Marketo, which many of you heard of, leading marketing automation application. So yeah, I sort of live and breathe MarTech during the day. In the, sorry, do you want me to share, Nina?
No, let me pull up some slides. And
got it. Oh, you bring up different slides. Got it. Yeah. So in the outside of work hours, I'm married and I have 2 kids. I've been spending lots of time during this stay at home doing both more exercise, so streaming yoga and running and working out. And then, to be honest, I have increased my alcohol consumption a little bit here as well. Now the good news is that those two have counteracted each other, and I've managed to kind of actually lose a couple of pounds during this time. So yeah, that's kind of me in a nutshell.
I love it. And where did your love of mixology and cocktail making, where did it all stem from?
Kind of organic, I'd say. I would say the start would probably, I'd point to one of the other things I've done in the past that I have a passion for is I've ridden my bicycle down the coast 7 times. So like San Francisco to LA or something, kind of camping along the way. And I remember there was one year I was going and my buddy and I just got into the habit of drinking margaritas every night, as we could, where we could stop at restaurants along the way. So when we got back, I sort of endeavored to sort of learn how to make a good margarita. That was probably the first set of cocktails I learned how to master.
I love that. Good inspo story. All right. Well, I got the privilege of taking a sneak peek at your deck, and you're making one of my favorite cocktails today. So I'm super excited for you to share your wealth of knowledge. But without further ado, the floor is yours.
Great. Let's kind of get into it. Yeah. So, stay on this slide for a second. I really think that cocktails have almost, I think, become part of this sort of stay-at-home experience for a lot of us. People are obviously baking a lot and, cooking more things at home, and I think for a lot of people, there's sort of 2 trends that have made cocktails kind of explode in just the last month. The first being like, sometimes at the end of the day, we kind of want to drink and we sort of related to that kind of we're home and we have kind of flexibility. But the other thing is I think a lot of people are finding that they have some time on their hands. And, in our busy normal schedules, you get home and sometimes it's all the energy we have to do to kind of open a bottle of wine or crack a beer. But, in this sort of slightly different pace here, people, including myself, are finding time to craft something, make something a little bit more complicated, a little bit more sophisticated, and really enjoy it. So I think cocktails kind of are perfect for helping us kind of with this kind of stay-at-home experience. So let's get into it here. If you go to the next slide, we've got the agenda here. I'm going to start with some just true basics about literally what is the definition of a cocktail and how do you sort of, what do you need to you do to even have a cocktail. I'll spend some time on kind of ingredients and really some ideas on stocking your home bar, my recommendations on what to buy, and then we'll wrap up with some recipes. So next slide, we get into it. So a cocktail, can you go to the next slide, please? Yeah, so, so the classic definition of a cocktail, back one, thank you, is a mixed drink that combines any liquor with something sweet, a little bitter, and then some water, which is usually diluted ice. When you think of an old fashioned, which is a name of a cocktail, part of the reason it's called an old fashioned is because that's exactly what this recipe is. Simple liquor, sweetener, bitters, and ice. That's evolved in sort of modern times i.e. the last, post-prohibition era, to really be any combination of a spirit, a mixer, and ice. And you can kind of add and remove, any of those things. But ice is really, really probably the key element, actually, across all of these. So if you go to the next slide, what we see here, this is sort of one of my favorite quotes. Ice is to cocktails as heat is to food. If you're cooking, you need heat. If you're making cocktails, you need ice. And ice is really doing kind of two things. First of all, it's making it cold. And just put simply, cold cocktails taste better. But it also is helping with dilution. The funny thing about kind of a lot of alcohols, especially ones that are higher proofs, it's sort of so strong that for some people, it like literally fires off the reaction you have around poison. They're like, wow, what is this thing that's like so burning in my face that you can't taste all the flavors. And so by diluting that high alcohol down a little bit, it helps us to take that harsh edge off so we can actually taste what's going on. Now, you've probably heard about, there's two ways to chill and dilute your cocktail. One is shaking and one is stirred. And this is a pretty firm rule that most cocktail people take pretty seriously. A drink that is got citrus in it, like lime or lemon or other kind of, mixers, that you're going to want to shake it up. And shaking, adds air and almost, bubbles, to it, which can create kind of a mouthfeel. But you would never want to do that to a drink that's kind of pure booze, like a martini or a Manhattan. That you're always going to want to stir. So you can get the dilution, the chilling, without the aeration. That's why, Bond ordering his martini shaken, not stirred, offends a lot of people, because that's not how you should make a martini. Apparently, there's a video of Stanley Tucci making Negronis that's been popular on the internet, and he shakes them too. So again, to each their own, but I recommend sticking by the classics. Shake your citrus drinks, stir your boozy drinks. And then last tip is, always then strain it into fresh ice. Don't just use the ice that you use to shake it. That's going to get crumbled and mashed up and will melt much faster than straining into fresh ice. Okay, so now that we've covered probably the most important thing, which is chilling, let's go to the next slide. Talk about some tools that you might want to have to make sure that you can make cocktails at home. So the basics here, first of all, is you need a shaker. This particular picture I showed here shows two, where you kind of take one shaker and you put it on top of the other, shake, shake, shake. For what it's worth, I actually prefer to use a pint glass. So just one regular shaker, a pint glass on top, and you use that to shake or stir. But then you definitely need a strainer, or what's known as a Hawthorne strainer. So when you're done with it, you pour it on top and you strain that into a glass. So that's pretty much basics. You got to have that. You got to have a bar spoon, one that you can kind of mix the drinks with. The one I'm showing here it's built in so that it can pivot around, so it makes it even easier to stir. When we share the slides, by the way, afterwards, I've got links in all these cases where you see the red underline to purchase this particular item from Amazon. I don't get any cut on that. I'm just recommending the kind of things that I like. I'm not a fan of using jiggers. Jiggers are those little tiny things. You can see a picture of the little jigger on this kit here. I really like this little mini OXO measuring cup because really you can get the exact small amounts of a half and a third and all those types of things. And lastly, you got to have a juicer. Fresh juice is really important to so many cocktails, so I recommend you have that. So if you have these four things, you're set to start making cocktails. But a couple other things on the next slide that you might think about getting would be, first of all, to sort of garnish drinks, you might want to have a zest of citrus or something. So you can get that, a muddler to help kind of muddle fruit, or mint if you're making a mojito type of thing. And then personally, I find that having nice ice molds goes a really long way in your impressiveness factor. Right now, I'm drinking this lovely drink, which is non-alcoholic because it's only 2 p.m. here in California. So this is just a ginger beer, but if you can see carefully, there is like a giant ice cube in there, which makes any drink look fancier. So I do recommend getting an ice mold. Okay, let's move on. We got a lot more cocktails to cover. Next slide, please. So let's talk about ingredients and what you might need to buy in terms of the actual alcohol. So if you go next slide. So really, there's sort of three categories of alcohol. The first and the most common one is your liquor, your distilled spirits. And there's obviously lots of kinds here, but I've got the 6 most common kinds listed. For many people, especially these days, they love their brown liquor, they love their whiskey, and so this is always distilled from a grain and aged. A very bourbon is very common. Bourbon is almost always got to be made predominantly out of or completely out of corn. When you compare that to rye, which is also a whiskey that is made predominantly out of rye. So it's pretty easy to sort of tell these two apart. Think about cornbread. Cornbread is usually going to be a little bit sweeter. So bourbon's going to be a little bit sweeter. Whereas you think about rye bread's a little bit spicier, and that's why rye whiskey is going to be spicier. Scotch is typically made in Scotland, and they usually make it over smoked peat. So it's going to get that smoky flavor. And obviously there's lots of other kinds of whiskeys. There's Irish whiskey, Canadian whiskey, et cetera. Ultimately experiment, but bourbon and rye are going to be your basics. Tequila is distilled from the agave plant. There's some bad tequila out there that many of us have probably bad memories from spring breaks or whatever. Always buy 100% blue agave, and you'll be in much, much better shape and avoid some of those headaches. Gin and vodka are both clear liquors that can be made from a bunch of other things. Vodka is typically flavorless, almost. They've sort of distilled out all the flavor. Gin is basically almost just, you take vodka and then you add in various botanical flavorings, almost always including juniper. Rum is distilled from something sweet like sugar and molasses, and then brandy is distilled from fruits. So that's one category. The cures is another category. So these are distilled spirits that have been sweetened. So vermouth is by far your most common liqueur. And frankly, it's funny. So when I have gone through periods where I want to drink less, I just don't buy vermouth. And there's basically that hand ties you to make cocktails so much so that it sort of solves the problem for me. Vermouth is really, really important. And there's a bunch of other liqueurs as well that can make sort of more advanced drinks. And then you thirdly have your category of aperitifs and digestifs, of which Italy is probably the most famous here. So a lot of the best ones come from Italy, whether it's Campari or other fancy Amaros, and they're usually good for adding bitter flavors to cocktails. At the end of the day, your cocktail should be about balance between the sweet, the sour, the bitter, and all that kind of stuff. Okay, next slide, please. We gotta get soon. We're gonna make some cocktails. Ingredients I do gotta cover. I said earlier, vermouth is like super important. You basically take the distilled spirit and then you basically add a distilled spirit to a wine, for example. There's usually two kinds of vermouths. You're going to see sweet vermouth or dry vermouth, or red vermouth versus white vermouth sometimes. There are so many brands of vermouth. My personal favorite is Carpano Antica. Costs a little bit more, but it's got a great vanilla flavor to it. Dolan is sort of my go-to if you're not looking for anything too fancy. I know there's some people who say Martini Rossi is not even worth drinking. It's fun to experiment. One day I did a test where we made Manhattans with the same rye and different vermouths. And we did a blind testing so people could really see how much that changes things. But perhaps the most important thing I want to say about vermouth is you got to store it properly. I've talked to so many people who have bad negative experiences about vermouth where they're like, I just don't like it, or it's bad or whatever. The thing about vermouth is you got to remember it's a wine. So once you open it, you got to keep it refrigerated. Where possible, use a wine preservation system to like pump the air out or something. I always recommend buying the smaller bottles because again, you just don't want to like have it sit around too long and go bad. And really should just try to make sure that you are using it in less than 3 months. Otherwise, you're just putting vinegar and bad stuff into your cocktails. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so the mixers, there's lots of kinds of mixers. Bitters are pretty important. It's amazing how literally a couple drops of something can truly change the taste of your cocktail. So this is fun, where it's just fun to experiment with different kinds of bitters. Syrups add sweetness to your drink without adding alcohol. So you'll see a lot of recipes call for simple syrup. And you can buy simple syrup for like $6 or $7 a bottle, but honestly, it is the easiest thing in the world to make. Literally, take a pan or pot, put in a cup of sugar, a cup of water, and boil it. Once it's boiled, let it cool, boom, you got simple syrup. It is that easy. I make some every once in a while. I throw it into an old Vermouth bottle, and I keep it around. You can also use other things like agave and maple for sweeteners, depending on what you're making. Fruit juice, fresh fruit juices can be mixed in with things. And then obviously there's a bazillion of sodas that you can kind of mix in as well. The pro tip on this one is making your own simple syrup. Okay, so a lot of times I get this kind of question. All right, what do I need to buy? So this is my recommended shopping list. Definitely get yourself a bottle or two of whiskey. And by the way, you don't, where I've listed brands here, I'm sort of listing kind of my recommended brand for making cocktail. These are like, Bullet is not that expensive. You can buy a bottle of Bullet for like $22 at Trader Joe's, which is kind of why that's my go-to for kind of inexpensive, whiskey. For tequila, Hornitos is sort of your lowest or your least expensive 100% agave that I found. Again, it's also like $22 at Trader Joe's. For gin, the sort of lower end one that I get at Trader Joe's is Tanqueray. Great for making Negronis and things like that. For martinis, I really do like the flavor of Hendrick's. It's got like a cucumber flavor to it. But again, part of the fun is experimenting here. But I think Hendrick's is worth a little bit extra for martinis. I already mentioned for Vermouth, Carpano Antica is my favorite. You got, with what I just said, you can make some cocktails, but if you get Campari and Cointreau and some bitters, you're really rounding out your bar. Make your own simple syrup. Make sure you can get fresh lime and fresh lemon. And as you'll see in a minute, you can make a whole ton of cocktails from the basics. On the right side, over time, you can add some other things. You can get your dry vermouth, you can get fancy cherries. My recommendation here is, and really how I've built up my bar over time, is every week or two or month or so, depending, I'll like, hey, I want to make a new cocktail that I've never made before. And so I end up buying the bottle of whatever it is I need to make that one specific cocktail. But then obviously by having that extra bottle now, I've sort of exponentially increased all the different things I can make. So that's sort of a fun way to kind of, build and expand your bar inventory over time without, bankrupting yourself. So that's your basic shopping list. If you go to the next slide, I think we're getting into recipes next. Oh yeah, sorry, one more piece of shopping is your glassware. Glassware really matters. I think, to me, just like having like that nice ice cube is part of enjoying my drink, having the nice glassware as well is important. Most people have highball glasses lying around their house because they're just kind of water glasses for a lot of people. You can use just a small water glass for your lowball rocks or your lowball or rocks drink, or you can buy fancy ones. And then you got to have a Cooper martini glass. I personally can't stand the pointy ones. So the Cosmo glass from the late 90s. But the more older kind, the coupe glass is nice for a lot of different drinks. And that's where something's served up. So typically, when you see a cocktail, you'll see it's either served up, no ice, or on the rocks, or a rock, one or many pieces of ice. That's an important distinction. Next slide, please. Okay, so now let's get into some recipes. If we're doing this live, this is where we'd be making some stuff. But your basic cocktail recipe, again, if you're not sure what to do, you're almost never going to go wrong with 2 parts liquor, 1 part sweet, 1 part sour. And I'll explain a little bit more about that in a minute. I didn't know where to put this other tip here, but when you're making the drink, usually put the cheap stuff in first, because that way if you over pour or screw something up, you're not wasting the good stuff. Always use that measuring cup though. That's key. This is a science of getting the ratios right. So don't eyeball your measurements here. All right. So next slide, please. All right, so this is the first kind of real recipe, and I think this is a great one to sort of just teach people, how to make a cocktail. It's a great one to practice. And what is it's a good old lemonade recipe. So again, as you'll see here, my basic recipe matches exactly what I showed you earlier. 2 parts water, 1 part lemon juice, which is sour, 1 part simple syrup, which is sweet. You put those into a shaker, you shake, 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 you pour it over ice. It's gonna be some of the best lemonade you've ever had. So once you've mastered a basic recipe like that, you can get to start riffing on the basics. And so, other people and I like to call this Mr. Potato Head modifications. Once you have a basic recipe, Mr. Potato Head is just change one thing out for the other. So if you take that lemonade recipe and you substitute the water for the gin, or gin for the water, you now have, actually a pretty good drink by itself, but you add Prosecco to it, you get French 75s. Or you add soda to that, you get a Tom Collins. Or if you substitute whiskey for the water, you get a whiskey sour. Same basic recipe here, but you're Mr. Potato Heading out different things to make different drinks. I've already seen in the chat, list, French 75s have become really popular in the last year. So this is a really, really good go-to one if you want to kind of impress company. Moving on, please. So I was reading an article actually just over the weekend that was really riffing on this idea of a basic recipe that you can then Mr. Potato Head. And what I loved about this article is it talked about the cocktail mother recipes. So if you learned like fancy cooking, there's a certain number of mother sauces that you make. And once you know how to make those main sauces, you know how to make lots of sauces. And so really this talked about, okay, there's really these, technically they talked about 6, but I don't like flips, so I didn't even include them. Core recipes. So we talked earlier about the old fashioned, right? And the old fashioned was just liquor, bitters, sweetener, ice, right? And so that's your classic old fashioned drink. 2 parts whiskey, a little bit of sweetener like simple syrup or a sugar cube, and some bitters. You stir it up, serve it on the rocks. But now if you start Mr. Potato Head doing that, you can add or change a couple things. You can get the Sazerac or the mint julep. A martini, this is the whole category of drinks that are going to be boozy. That's where the booze is cut by a fortified wine. So classically, a dry martini is gin or vodka with just a little bit of dry vermouth, stir and served up. But again, that same recipe is Manhattans, Negronis, and Boulevardiers. And I'll go into those details in a second. Your daiquiri family combines your sweet and sour. That's what we were looking at on the prior page. But in this case, if you use rum instead of the water or the gin, lime instead of lemon, you have a classic daiquiri. By the way, there are people who say they don't like daiquiris because they think they're super sweet. That's the bad bastardized daiquiris. Good rum, lime, simple syrup, it's a really tasty drink. Personally, I mostly make cocktails out of these first 3 rows, but your sidecar is more your acid forward, family. And I think by far the most popular ones in there are margaritas. Although, as I'll show you in a minute, I'm also a big fan of the last word. And lastly, highball. These are just your 2 ingredient cocktails, right? Liquor and soda. So that's sort of what I'm drinking now, which is ginger beer, just no alcohol. A Moscow Mule is 2 parts vodka, 6 parts ginger. Gin and tonic, 2 parts gin, 6 parts tonic, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Next slide, please. So now these are some specific recipes based on riffing off the stuff we just saw before. So your classic Manhattan is 2 parts whiskey, 1 part sweet vermouth, a little bit of bitters. You can stir it and then you serve it, and that can either be up or on the rocks. Sometimes it's fun to put scotch in instead of whiskey, and then you get a drink called a Rob Roy, which is a little spicy. You replace some of the vermouth with, Campari or Aperol, you get a little Italy. The Negroni is, it's a pretty spirit-forward drink. And a lot of people, the bitter from the Campari is an acquired taste. But for cocktail drinkers, they love the Negroni. Part of the beauty of the Negroni for me is its simplicity. It's equal parts gin, Campari, and Vermouth. Which means you can make a big one, you can make a small one. It's all pretty straightforward. You put changed whiskey out for the gin, you get a drink called a Bouvardier. You put tequila in instead, you get a Rosita. Again, you can play with all these things. I've made it with mezcal as well, which is tasty. The classic margarita recipe, riffing off the prior thing, is 3 parts tequila, 2 parts Cointreau, 1 part lime. Shake it and strain on the rocks. That to me ends up being not quite sweet enough for my taste. So after much experimentation, I've landed on something a little bit more complicated, which has these ratios, including some of my homemade simple syrup. And that's kind of what I'd recommend. I think the last slide here then gets to some of my kind of two other things. So this is a fun chart that sort of gives you some suggestions for how you might start thinking about riffing off of different flavors. Your kind of what goes with what. Your classic combinations are gin and lime, tequila and lime, and then whiskey and lemon. So you'll occasionally see a gin and lemon. You'll almost never see whiskey and lime or tequila and lemon, for example. And then you have, this little chart here for sort of some more advanced pairings and that kind of thing. Okay, finally, on the last slide, please. These are my go-tos. These are the recipes that I love to make day in and day out. Where I want to be a little bit more impressive. I won't read through all of these. The Vieux Carré is a New Orleans recipe. If you like Manhattans, people tend to like the Vieux Carré because it changes up kind of the classic flavors there. The penicillin starts with sort of your margarita recipe, adds fresh ginger, so kind of gets a little spice on there, but it uses the scotch, the smoky scotch, to add a whole nother dimension to it, as well. Aviations are beautiful. The creme de violette makes it just a beautiful blue color, if you will. And then the last word is, I think, kind of just a great cocktail drinker's cocktail. It's got, the sour from the lemon, the booze from the gin, the green chartreuse brings almost a herbal, bitterness, and then the maraschino adds the sweetness. And somehow all those come together to make a really, really interesting cocktail. And that last word is also one that's super fun to riff on. Change out the lemon juice for lime and put tequila in for the gin. You have a whole new drink. So definitely worth playing with. With that, I think we're at the hour or the half hour here. I'm happy to stick around for a couple questions if people want. But that's Cocktails 101 in half an hour.
I love that. I'm not going to lie. That chart that you threw up, Jon, is like print out, put in my kitchen status. It's so clever. I love it. All right. See if any chats come through. But I did have one question for you. Sure. In all of your travels over the course of your life, what is the best cocktail that you've had and where was it?
It's hard to pick one, but one that has stuck in my head because I've never managed to recreate it was a bar in Manhattan, and I don't even remember the name of the bar, but it wasn't very crowded. And I sat down with the bartender. It was one of those things where I was having my second one, so it was a little more chatty, and I was like, hey, maybe just make me something, interesting. And she asked what I liked, and she made something that had mezcal and an ancho chili liqueur to it that it was delicious. And again, that's one I've not managed to recreate, so that one sticks with me.
I love that. That's a good pro tip. I mean, I always am a fan of sitting at the bar than at a table in a restaurant. And for that reason being, I love to see dealer's choice, what the bartender, pegs me as and can whip up for me.
Yeah, I like that. All right, do you just want me to hit some of these questions or?
Sure, yeah. Let's go for it. First off, we should cheers.
Cheers. You got a real drink there because 5 o'clock for you. So there's a question about cocktails with egg whites. So the funny thing is that when I mentioned there were the 5 mother recipes, there actually is a 6th one called the flip. which I didn't include because I never made one from that family. But those are the ones that have the egg whites to them. So, so Greg, I don't really have any guidance for you on cocktails with egg whites because that has scared me so far. But there is a whole family there that can be tackled at some point. Just start looking for the flip, whiskey flip or whatever, and you'll find stuff. There's another question around mixology YouTube channels. Again, I don't have a lot of good one for you on that one because I don't tend to kind of, I've just been doing yoga classes on YouTube, and that's the extent of what I do on YouTube. But I Google articles all the time. Typically for me, as I said, there's a particular cocktail I want to make, and so I'll buy the ingredients for that and I'll make that. And then I'll go and, okay, what else can I now make with this other bottle I have? And just Google, Googling ingredients tends to show up, lots of good recipes. There's a question on maraschino liqueur I recommend. Pretty much the only one I've ever bought is Luxardo, which is sort of the classic. So there may be other ones out there that are less expensive, but I've never gone wrong with Luxardo.
My friend Mary Bose, you have your hand up. If you have a question, feel free to pop it in the chat. But last but not least, with summer coming, hopefully some relief in sight, what's your go-to summer cocktail, Jon?
It would either be the penicillin or the last word.
I like that.
So typically, the more boozy ones, those are more to me, the winter, like the Manhattan, the more kind of easy drink or warmer ones. Mm-hmm. And then the things that bring citrus and shaking, tend to be a little bit more kind of warm weathers.
Love it. All right. Any last, here we go. Another one from Paul. Yeah.
Sugar cube or simple syrup on the old fashioned, doesn't matter. I personally prefer the simple syrup, which is why I use in my recipe, because, I found that I know what will dissolve, whereas the sugar cube, and then you put the bitters on and you stir it. I don't always have confidence. I've definitely had situations where the sugar didn't completely dissolve for me. So I think the classicist would say sugar cube, but I've had more luck with the simple syrup.
I like it. And I love that with simple syrup too, you can throw in any kind of herbs or fruit or anything and, kind of kick it up a notch, make your own mojito simple syrup or whatever you want. So I'm with you on that one, Jon.
You got some experience yourself. All right.
Oh, looks like Mary had one last one.
Keeping calories lower with mixology. I've been more about upping the output as opposed to managing the input. So I'd rather do like an extra walk or a longer yoga class and then have whatever cocktail I want. But the honest truth is alcohol is pretty high in calories. I think it's 7 calories per gram, whereas fat is 9 calories and protein and carbs are 4 calories per gram. So the only true way to lower the alcohol or the calories in your cocktails is to lower the alcohol. And so you can Google low ABV cocktails or low alcoholic beverage or whatever, low alcohol cocktails. And that'd be your best way for managing your calories. And beyond that, the sweeter it is, the more calories it's going to have. So, finding ones that are less sweet. I should say the chart that everybody seems to love wasn't mine. I sort of credited, to a guy named Ash, what's his name? Bushworth, I think, is the one who kind of came up with it. And I found it in a Popular Mechanics article about cocktails. So maybe we'll send that link around as well.
Yeah, well, a couple of folks had some questions. We'll kick over the presentation that Jon ran through tonight to everybody that registered. So feel free to make these drinks at your leisure whenever you'd like.
Well, look forward to doing this in person sometimes, folks, where we can actually have shakers and do this, because a cocktail class that doesn't end with us drinking a cocktail is never as much fun. But everybody go have this on your own.